Hi there, I'm your host, John Ivison, and I'm joined, as usual, by Marcella Munro of Macmillan Vantage and Andrew Balfour of Rubicon Strategies. Greetings, friends. Let's start with breaking news, which is maybe less exciting than it sounds, but just as we're recording this on Thursday lunchtime, Justin Trudeau has come out and said that Canada will not send diplomats or politicians to the Winter Olympics in Beijing next year. The Chinese have kind of dismissed this previously with the Americans, at least, by saying they weren't invited. And in practical terms, it doesn't really mean very much. Probably one or two people who might not be going who might have been going. But I do think it's significant that it's a kind of pivot in Canada's relationship with China, which has to this point been one of comprehensive engagement. We now seem to be more leery of China's assertiveness. Do you guys read that much into it, Marcella?
Well, I do. I mean, I kind of found myself a little bit wistful for the good old days when Western politicians would take a boycott of the Olympic Games as a political signal seriously, right? Like in 1980, where they actually did boycott the Games in Russia, because Russia, of course, was then invading Afghanistan. It didn't change anything then. I think the Olympic Committee over the years has worked very hard to make it seem like, you know, these athletes and the prime of their career are the people that we are most punishing when we do that. And so that's the frame within which you get this kind of milquetoast solution of this quote-unquote diplomatic boycott. I think obviously our relationship with China is already on pretty tenuous grounds, given what happened with Huawei and the two Michaels. And if I were an Olympic athlete, I would be somewhat concerned about my safety. So a lot of the questions were about that. So I think, you know, we are in a different moment here, but I don't know that this changes anything one way or the other. And the safety, I think, is a real concern.
Andrew, there does seem to be a lack of coherence about the Canadian policy on China. I mean, I was with Trudeau when we went to Beijing in 2017, I think it was, late 2017, looking for a free trade deal. Obviously, that didn't happen. Then you've got the two Michaels case. We had Francois Philippe Champagne first coming out when he was foreign minister, talking about the 3 Cs, which were challenging, cooperating, and something else. Marc Garneau came out with another C when he talked about coexisting, and yet the actual policy doesn't seem to have changed until now. And now we've got the Winter Olympics diplomatic boycott. I think we will be hearing something on Huawei pretty soon, which will be yet another snub for China. And then there's another area where China's been trying to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think Canada is probably not going to look favourably on that, and may well look favourably on Taiwan's application. Do you think this is all part of a piece to come up with a more coherent policy?
Well, I mean, I think that at the point in time when we had 2 Canadians in captivity in China, that we didn't have much of a leg to stand on in most cases. So now we can be a little more, call it elbows up.
Yeah.
I agree with Marcella's point. I mean, I wouldn't want to go to China right now. If I was an athlete, I'd be thinking about it a couple of times. On the Huawei piece, I mean, the interesting thing about the Huawei piece is that the big 3/4 have already the market has already determined that they're not going to be using Huawei in 5G. Now are only concerned about any 5G getting into any Canadian networks would be if some of the tinier companies, like the ones up in the north, et cetera, started using their pieces. So the government could get off easy on the Huawei one and say, well, you know, the market has already determined that it won't be part of it. The other piece to that is, you know, what do we do with the embedded pieces of Huawei already in 4G? So there's more complications to the Huawei issue than just making one decision around the future of 5G, because we already have it in our system.
Right. Marcella, it may be complete coincidence, but our man in Beijing, Dominic Barton, this week announced that he is stepping down at the end of the year. I don't tend to believe in coincidences, especially not when we were about to make an announcement in the Olympics, which apparently he doesn't agree with, if you look at the words he used in an interview with the Star this week. He was pushing for closer ties with China. ironically, our trade with China in the first 6 months of this year went through the roof. Somewhat embarrassingly for a country that talks about fighting climate change, our thermal coal exports went up 185%. What do you make of the prospect of our commercial ties with China in the wake of this?
Well, I think that's a very challenging question for Canada. I mean, we and that's possibly why we have these kind of middle of the road, I guess you would call it, diplomatic solutions to tricky problems, is that we do need China economically. It's not just thermal coal, of course. China is a recipient of all different kinds of our natural resources. And of course, we haven't seen Canadians stop wanting goods that come to us from China. So that's always the tightrope that we're walking. I just feel like, some of what this Olympic thing to me signals, and I think Andrew's point is well taken about the complicated issues around Huawei that we seem to try and make overly simplistic, is that the whole question is very complicated. And so I guess the bottom line is, are we going to have a kind of more transparent discussion about these issues and what other serious actions we might want to take on human rights, and how do we square that with our economic needs? Right.
I think for most people, far less immediate, or far more immediate than the Winter Olympics, is the new Omicron variant of COVID. I think most people felt that COVID was on its way out. The remaining restrictions would gradually be loosened and life would return to normal. It seems that this variant has reawoken the fears that we're in for the long haul. I mean, I looked at the stats today. It kind of surprised me that we still have 3,000 cases per day on average, 27 deaths. Ontario is predicting that by mid-January that number might rise to 3,000 in Ontario alone. Put severe stress on the health system in that province. 80% of those hospitalizations, deaths, cases are unvaccinated people, but I guess Omicron might change that. We might see the vaccinated people getting severely ill. What do we make of that? Are we heading back into lockdowns and more restrictions?
I don't think that
Andrew?
In Ontario, where we all are, that we'll see a lockdown. I don't know whether Premier Ford going into an election year could politically do another lockdown. He might have to if the hospitals get overrun again, but it would be very difficult. We've seen that the Western provinces are wildly opposed to lockdowns, and Atlantic Canada just hasn't been struck by it as much. So I don't think we're going back into lockdowns, but there might be increased restrictions. I mean, we already see around these new travel restrictions. If you choose to go out of the country over the holidays, coming home, you're back into a quarantine briefly while you wait for a test, even though you have to get a test at the destination to come back. I haven't followed that one along. I think that we're going to have an interesting winter. We've already seen this through the first year of COVID. When it's nice outside and people can do things outside, we don't have as much COVID. And then when everyone gets sent inside, you get more COVID. It's pretty simple, actually.
Yeah. Marcella, there was some good news this morning from Pfizer, which said that a booster would seem to increase the efficiency of the vaccines, and that the vaccines themselves did neutralize the Omicron variant to some extent, although protection wasn't as great as it was against other variants. And yet, try and get a booster. Good luck to you. They're not out there. It would seem to me that even though we have the vaccines in stock, the advisory committee has said let's get people boosted. That's not happening yet.
Yeah, it took me so I was due for my booster, or eligible for my booster, a week ago Friday, and it took me 2 weeks to get an appointment for next Wednesday to get one.
Right.
So,
I mean, Quebec is not even accepting appointments yet.
Yeah. But I'm pretty excited about that. I think we need to be careful though here, guys. Right. We still don't really know what we need to know about Omicron to kind of really figure out the risks involved. We do know that the current surge, the current increase in cases we're seeing in Canada is Delta, right? That's what's breaking through the vaccines, and that's what's causing the most havoc in the system. But I think that there's a couple problems. One, with Christmas coming up, I mean, the travel regulations, because every country's kind of doing their own thing, are very confusing, right? We did a memo from Macmillan Vantage to a bunch of, well, to everyone in the firm, basically trying to outline in very simple language, because, for instance, when you come back from the United States, you actually don't have to take another test once you land. You don't have to quarantine. That wasn't really clear at first, the way the Canadians were talking about it. So I really encourage people to take a close look at what the actual regulations are, because I think the second point I want to make is that politically, I think another lockdown of any kind is going to become more and more difficult. Even myself, I mean, I'm such a good person. I try to really follow the rules every step along the way. I don't know if I could do it again. Like, as a single person that spent almost the better part of 18 months seeing one person who I was allowed to have in my bubble on a weekly basis, and then basically seeing no one else, I don't know that I don't know if I have the stamina to make it through that again. And I feel like, look, I'm double vaxxed. I'm going to go get my booster shot. I wear my mask everywhere I go. At some point, I'm just going to take a little bit more risk, because I can't live my life just sitting in my apartment, and I know I'm not the only one feeling that way. So I think
Sure.
we're in a very difficult position. Then the other side of that, you have all these parents, especially in Ontario, where I'm just feeling like all my friends that have kids that are school-age children are just, every day is a nightmare, right? Someone gets the sniffles, and the whole family gets locked down until they can all get tested. So, we need a lot more rapid tests circulating. I just think that governments are should be a little bit more spry right now in how they're reacting. Instead, what they've done is just pull the panic cord about Omicron. I think it's a mistake.
Good points. Okay, finally, a strange one. The government released its list of cabinet committees late last week. It turns out that there's not just one cabinet committee, but two that are labelled Economy, Inclusion and Climate. One is Cabinet Committee A and one is Cabinet Committee B. Does anyone have a clue what's going on? I mean, is one of a higher rank than the other? Will they look at the same things? That seems a very odd one to me. Andrew?
What I've been told to kind of how this is shaking out is that they have separate mandates. This is obviously a huge topic for this government. And so instead of the way it was before, where you were going to have 20 people on one committee, and we all know that a meeting of 20 people accomplishes very little, you'll now have smaller groups, and they will be tasked with different things. It's an easy thing to make fun of, A and B, whatever. But first, I don't think that.
So let's make fun of it.
Yeah.
Well,
let me in there.
Before I let you guys do that, I just wanted to point out my usual point is that, Canadians don't even know that there's cabinet committees. They don't have a clue what that is. So us inside the bubble, we can look at it and make fun of it, A and B, and maybe they should have gotten more creative names for it, but it's still a cabinet committee, and it's like a pretty important thing. Now over to you guys to make fun of it.
Well, it's
All
not.
right. There rests the case for the defence. People don't know about it, so it's okay.
care.
Marcella, what do you think?
I think it's bonkers. I think it's like you're asking for more trouble, right? You've basically introduced a second ring into what's already going to be a big circus tent, and said, we don't. First of all, they have to divide up the issues, right? What they're trying to say is that issues around climate and the economy and how we're going to get out of the climate change problem need to be divided into two tables, and one's going to be led by natural resources, the other one's going to be led by environment. Like, this is you're basically asking for a head-on collision. And if I'm looking for a way to kind of game my way around some of these really heavy policy discussions, then this is you're just opened the door to like a whole flood of problems. You can't, as someone who worked in the Alberta government when we were trying to align our climate policy with our natural resource policy, if we had said if I in the energy minister's office had said to the environment minister, you know what, we're going to have our own table to have these discussions, talk to you later, it would have been complete chaos. Like, we had to meet more as bigger groups, not less, to deal with some of these thorny issues. And it's just not going to work. It's just the whole thing seems like something out of Yes Minister, where maybe some of the, I don't know, is some of the department people, are they just trying to keep this crazy conversation crazy so that nothing gets done? That's kind of how it feels to me.
Well, my concern is that, so in 2018, they merged the Growing the Middle Class Committee, which is essentially economic growth, I guess, with diversity and inclusion. And now we've thrown climate into that in two separate committees. And it would seem to me that diversity, inclusion and climate are higher priorities for this government than economic growth, which is, I mean they see their legacies in those two areas, not in growth.
I think that might be taking it a bit far. Obviously.
Well, it may be, but I think it's fair to say that this is not a government, and this has been said to me by people inside the government, where the first priority, or the first thing that comes to mind, is the economy. Perhaps the exception might be Francois-Philippe Champagne, but he's the only economically minded minister, it seems. Do you disagree with that, Andrew?
Are they going to...
I do disagree with that.
Well, tell me why.
Because
Name three others.
Because at the end of the day, the only way that you can accomplish any of these things around environment and climate and inclusion is if you have a functioning economy and you have money to be able to pay for all of those things. So every single person in government understands that, money isn't free and there are ups and downs and checks and balances.
Do they realize that? Do they really realize that?
Of course they do.
They don't do a very good job of communicating that if they do. Let me just refer to a piece that I wrote last week based on a National Bank financial report, and it showed that the 5-year average for investment in this country is in danger of contracting, i.e. it's not, new investment would not even cover depreciation. We are bleeding capital. It's a crisis I think for a small country like Canada.
I'm hearing lots of business people around me anyway are reiterating some version of what you're saying, John. 100%.
I mean, our pension funds are not even investing in Canada.
Well, I just want to know with these two committees, are they going to be able to kind of American Idol style bring different versions of legislation to the whole cabinet, and then they're going to have to have a competition to see which version of the natural resources policy people like, or maybe they'll vote clause by clause. You say Canadians don't know about this, Andrew, but this is going to be a recipe for chaos.
So, Andrew, I would say that you're not very prescient about many things, but you were prescient enough to say it's easy to make fun of.
Thanks, buddy.
On that note, I'm going to use my privilege to end the conversation and wish you a good week, and we'll speak to you again next week.
Bye, guys.